Professor K here, and I'm back with a quick tutorial on how to add custom typefaces to your CSS. And I'm going to do this using Google Fonts today and demonstrating with the Your Favorite Recipe assignment. Let's get started. Alright, so in the Your Favorite Recipe assignment, I'm just going to go back to XD and kind of look at what fonts I'm using here. If I click on one of my titles, I can see that I'm using Bangers. And if I click on my body copy, I can see that I'm using Roboto. So those are the two typefaces that I'm going to need to load in my CSS in order to see what's happening. All right, so here I'm just going to hop into Google Fonts and I'm going to type in Bangers. There's only one style here, so this is super easy. All I have to do is select this style. That's going to show in my selected families right here. Perfect. And then that'll be ready to use when I've collected all my fonts up. Next, I need to add Roboto. And this is where things get a little bit more complicated. Roboto has 12 styles. And what I need to do now as the web designer and developer on this project is decide which styles I need to load in order to make my page work. So why can't we just pick all the styles? Well, one thing that would be a really big problem with that is that then the browser would have to download all these styles, every single one. And that's not very good from a performance perspective. The more data that you have to download, either on your computer or on your phone, especially on your phone, think about those data plans, the longer it takes for the web page to load. So we really want to try and minimize the number of fonts that we're downloading, which means we have to think about, okay, well, what is the least number of fonts I can use without harming my content? So if I take a look through my mockups here, at a glance I can see that I am using Roboto Regular. Regular usually maps to the weight 400. So here you can even see that in Google Fonts it says Regular 400. So I know I want to select that style. However, there's also Italic and Bold that we may need to use. So now my question is there anywhere in my content where I might need italicized body copy or bolded body copy? As I'm taking a look through here right now, there's not. But say you were working in a CMS such as WordPress, that's where you might want to also load the regular italic and then bold 700, just to make sure that you've covered your bases. However, for this single page website, these two font families are just fine and will keep our performance nice and speedy. So let's go to view our selected font families. And under review, we can see we have both styles we need. And now we're going to go and embed them. Now there's two ways that you can do this. One is to use the link element in your HTML. So this is going to go and it's going to fetch a certain style sheet that has the styles for Bangers and Roboto. And then once you've done that, what you can do is use these CSS rules to actually specify those font families. You can also do this using the @import rule. So here, just to demonstrate what link looks like, let's copy this and then go to HTML, index.html, and at the top, just above our style sheet, because we want the font to be available before our main style sheet, style.css over here, we could link this CSS. And if we want, we can even visit this link and kind of see what's going on in the background. So let's copy that and open a new tab and paste it and just see what that CSS looks like. All right, so in the background, what Google Fonts does is it creates all these @fontface CSS rules for you. And @fontface, what it does is it says, okay, for whenever we see this font family with this style and this weight, I want you to use this font file on the server. So Google has a whole bunch of these font files on the server. And what it does is it says whenever you're looking at Bangers and it's using one of these types of different ranges of characters. So this Unicode range, it refers to a certain range of characters. This is for Greek, for Cyrillic, and then Latin would be the one that you would use for English. That is going to say, okay, use this font family. Now, if it doesn't support, say, Cyrillic, but you use Cyrillic characters, it would fall back to your fallback font. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But for right now, all you need to know is that Google is doing this work in the background for you. And if you ever need to host a font family for yourself, you're going to use the @fontface rule to both make the connection between the CSS and your font file on the server about where to look for the font, as well as make a connection between your server and the CSS to say, okay, when I'm using the font family Bangers or Roboto, take a look at this font over here. So that's what's going on in the background. I actually find it a little bit easier to just work in the style.css. So I'm going to use the other method of importing here, the @import rule, to get this style sheet in. And it does the exact same thing. It just does it through the CSS file. I find it a little bit easier just to keep all the styles in one place. So you can see that this didn't actually change the CSS at all. All we've done is bring in the font family. We're not actually using it. So in order to use this font family, and I'm just going to start with the H1 over here, what I'm going to do is type in font-family, and then in double quotes, my font family name, Bangers. It has to be exactly the same as what Google Fonts says. So here, make sure that you're using the exact same font family as Google says you should. Now, if I take a close look at this is using the right typeface, awesome. But I can see that this looks, with my very sharp design eyes, a little bit bolder than what I intended it to over here. The reason why is by default, all headings have a font weight of 700. And if you remember in Google Fonts, this font family actually only has a weight of 400. I mean, let's go look it up, right? Let's just go see what that looks like. Bangers, and we look at the one style. This only style that we have is going to be 400, right? We can see that over here in the review. So what we need to do is say, okay, now we want our font weight to be 400, so that matches. And now you can see, oh, that's looking so much better. So when this happens, this is called faux bolding. It's really ugly. You really want to try and make sure that you avoid that in your work. All right, so what else can we do next? We can just copy this and paste it for our H2s. And now, oh, it's looking so much better already. Perfect. And then finally, let's make sure that all of our body copy, all other text that's not an H1 or H2, uses Roboto. So going back to Google Fonts, we're going to remember that to use this, we want to use the font family of Roboto and the fallback of sans serif. Now let's take a look here. We have a font family of Bangers, but we never actually specified a fallback font. Font families comes in list. So every font family that you can use in this list is separated by a comma. We're just going to do a generic sans serif here. Google recommends cursive, but if you, let's take out Bangers here and see what it would fall back to. I like that sans serif as a fallback much better than, let's see what cursive is. Oh, terrible. That's not all the look I'm going for. Even though technically Bangers is a script type font because it's a comic script, a cursive or a script as a fallback is a terrible match for the basic look and feel of this. So what would be better to do is just to make sure that we have a sans serif fallback. So that's a good thing to try, is if this font didn't load, what would it look like? Just test out and make sure that your fallback font is what you want. So here, let's do sans serif to make sure that both the H1 and H2 have the proper fallbacks. All right, so how can we get this so that the typography for everything else uses Roboto? This nice sans serif font over here instead of this serif font. Now we could do P tags, right? But then let's just write that out. Let's say, okay, well, how about all paragraph tags get the font family of Roboto? Let's see what that looks like. Okay, Okay, well that looks good really here, looks great on the P tag here, but what about these ingredients? Those still have the serif. And say, oh, okay, well I guess I'll also add the li tag, right? Okay, now those are working. But what about this hyperlink? What about anything that falls outside of those? It's kind of like, you know, it's a game of like whack-a-mole trying to get all the tags. So instead of trying to individually name all the possible HTML tags that we could ever have in our body copy, which is a real pain in the butt, we're just going to remove that, and we're going to let CSS inheritance do the work for us. So the way that inheritance works is that you define a rule at the top level, and then it cascades down into all the child elements. And then what will happen is all the child elements will inherit that style. And one of the styles that behaves that way, conveniently, is font face. So we know this actually from our body. Remember how we set a font size of 18 pixels and everything was kind of based on that 18 pixel value? Everything from our paragraph to our list items? Well, we can use that same property here to also put in the font family. And now you can see that Roboto is here and it's applying everywhere just the way that we like it. Absolutely perfect. That's exactly what we want. And let's try this at 100%. All right, so that's what this looks like at 100%. Over here, this is funny. It actually looks a bit bigger than. Oh, you know what? I know why it looks a bit bigger. It's because I have this zoomed in, so it's easier for you to see. Huh? No wonder. If things look a little bit bigger and you're not sure why, always double check your browser zoom, especially if you're teaching. Anyway, so this is what it looks like at 100% scale. Let's bump this back up so it's easier for you to see on the screen as you're watching the tutorial. And I'm just going to keep that in mind that this is zoomed in a little bit. So the next sort of typography item that we could add here is called line height. And if you remember, in our mockups here, we decided that we wanted a line height of roughly 1.5, and that's how we got to this 27 here. Now, if we were to go from XD and like just go straight to 27, let's just let's see what happens if we put a line height of 27 in here and just use XD's value. Whoa, look at all that space. Okay, that's not actually what we want. If we put in 27 pixels, that might work better, but then what happens with our titles, and if we say make this smaller, right? Well, then we have everything's all out of whack. So this is not actually what we want. We want the multiplier. So it helps to remember what your multiplier was. Ours was 1.5. However, you could do 27 divided by 18 and get the same thing. So if you can't figure out what your multiplier was, you just forgot, just use your Mac to figure that out. And I'm using Command Spacebar to open up this very handy dandy menu. I constantly use that just to double check my math on things. So the best way to define line height is without a value at the end, and that just makes it a multiplier. So 18 pixels times 1.5 means that when we go to inspect element, this is going to compute, let's go to computed and see what it looks like, to a line height of 27 pixels. So let's just blow that up a little bigger so you can see it. This computed tab is really awesome. It can help you figure out like what your exact math is, along with the layout. I use these all the time. So we're in great shape with our typography. This is looking really nice. One last thing that we could do real quick here to just kind of make this a little bit better is cancel out some of the default spacing in the body and then start putting some spacing around our tags. So I think that's what we're going to look at next, is really tidying up the spacing and the font size of things. Before we do that, I do want to get the size right on my title here. So this is at 71, and I like using multipliers. So let's do 71 divided by 18. That's about 3.9. So when you go to define a font size, font dash size, You can use any sorts of units you want. You can use pixels, so 71 pixels is totally valid, and it will make it very large, which is exactly what we want. But I actually prefer to use ems. Now, if you remember, ems are a unit in typography that is based off of the width of one em character. And it's always based off of your body font size. So if I want to get my multiplier and I want to say I want something X size, my body size, I can do 71 divided by 18, and then I get this like 3.94 value. So here, instead of using pixels, which is not good for accessibility, it's hard to like increase and decrease the type size, I'm going to use that scale unit and do 3.9 em. And now you can see that's just about the same. I don't like to get too finicky about it. It's okay if it's not exactly the same. The computed font size is 70.2. I'm perfectly happy with that. I'm not so happy with the line height now. See how like big that is in comparison? Oof. Why don't we take down our line height, now that we can see this working, to something like 1.1. Let's see how that looks. Oh, much better. Sometimes I even go down to 1, especially at these larger sizes. That looks good, just to make sure that everything's looking and behaving the way I want. So let's do the same with our H2 down here. I'm just going to automatically, because I've figured out a line height of 1 works nicely with this typeface, I'm going to put that right in. And then for the H2, that's at 45. So I'm going to do 45 divided by 18 to find out my multiplier. Multiplier is 2.5. So let's set this to a font size of 2.5 em. Take a look down here. Oh, that looks so nice. Much better. And I wonder if these take em values too. It would be kind of nice if they did, right? Let's try a 1/4 em and see if that works. 0.25 em. Huh, check that out. So one thing that might be kind of nice is to just kind of play with these em values and get this so that, yeah, so that it scales with the type. And the reason why you might want to do this is because you can have a really consistent treatment to this if you use these same text shadow values up here. So let's try this with our yellow. Oh, and now see how these shadows both have kind of the same relationship to the text? They're both being scooted over by the same amount, even though they're different sizes. That's the beauty of not relying on pixel values. And if we go Command 0 and then blow it up even further, you can see that we don't lose the look and feel of this. Whereas if we had this in a pixel value, let's make this go back to our 4 pixels value here. Well, it looks like it's scaling it for us. But you know what? I'd rather just control it myself. So I always prefer to use ems with my typography. I like numbers that scale when you blow them up or take them back down. Pixels are just not as flexible. So definitely use ems whenever you're dealing with typography. Keep in mind that ems will kind of multiply depending on the parent size. So there's actually a practice exercise that will help you understand this and kind of like that relationship there. But for now, just think about things in ems. Ems are a great tool. They'll even keep this sort of relationship when you go to take down the body size to say like 10 pixels. Now see how everything is still the same relationship? That's why M's are so great, is because it's a scaling unit, not just a static unit. So next up, we're going to take a look at padding and margin and really finalizing some of the fine details of this mobile mockup. I'll see you in just a moment.